Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. So I'm gonna try to do these videos with like no editing. I'm just gonna start it right off the bat when I record because I have not been in the mood to do anything, to move a muscle. As you guys have seen, I have not been really uploading anything, and I'm gonna tell you why. I did upload I think it was like a life update video. I didn't really give tons of specifics, and in this one I am going to give some more specifics, so it's going to be a little bit more off the cuff, but I also want it to be informative, and it's something that by the way, this is going to be an NSFW type of video. If you're weird about female issues and that kind of stuff, I would suggest not watching it. But if you're a woman, you might want to see this, because this is something that I didn't know about, and that a lot of doctors don't know about, and I will talk about that as well. And I don't know why. It's just beyond me. It has really made me lose even more faith in just conventional medicine as a whole, because it's unbelievable what doctors should know that they just don't. So I think I touched on this in my last video. I don't even remember what I said in the last video. Obviously, I'm living on my own, and that has been stressful enough as it is. Never fails, though, that when something good happens in my life, something bad and typically life-altering will occur shortly after. I don't know if it's from the stress, obviously from my underlying health issues. That could also be part of the problem, but it never fails. Something good will happen, and then something really bad will follow, and I just don't know. I just don't know how my body and how my life is going to manage thereafter. So I have been having recurrent vaginal infections for several years now. So I may have talked about this in another video. Obviously, it's kind of a personal issue, but it's actually not uncommon. A lot of women have recurrent vaginal infections, whether they're yeast infections or bacterial vaginosis. I wasn't familiar with either one of these prior to, actually even after, when I started having my weird, symptoms from, I don't know, the Lyme disease or the autoimmune illness or whatever. I still wasn't getting vaginal infections or things like that. That wasn't one of my primary symptoms, or one of the symptoms that popped up in the very beginning. This was actually much later on. Even while I was married, because I was married for like the first half of my illness, and have been divorced for the second half. So even while I was married, I was not experiencing vaginal infections. Even while I was on long-term antibiotics, I wasn't experiencing vaginal infections. And that's typically one of the primary causes of vaginal infections is antibiotic use. You do antibiotics, it gives you a yeast infection because it kills off all the good bacteria in that area. And, and then you have to take yeast infection cream or medication and so on and so forth. That's kind of, the typical stuff. That's yeast infection. When it comes to bacterial vaginosis, one of the common, or what doctors will tell you is, if you're sexually active, that's the cause of bacterial vaginosis, which is a load of nonsense. And I'll tell you why. So, the BV is typically associated with sexual activity. If you're sexually active, you're more likely to get BV. I sort of get the theory behind that, because sexual activity can change the pH in that area, and that can lead to infections, particularly BV, which is, an imbalance, because BV lives naturally in your vaginal microbiome. It just overgrows because your pH is thrown off or whatever. So I actually, I've been divorced for, I think, 9 years. My divorce was finalized in 2014. For about 6 years, until last year, I was not sexually active whatsoever. I had a 6-year-long dry spell. Nothing. And throughout this time was when I started getting recurrent vaginal infections. So this theory that sex is the cause of BV or, whatever vaginal infections you get, I think is total nonsense. Because I didn't start getting the infections until I stopped having sex. So while I was having sex, I wasn't getting any infections. When I stopped, I was getting infections monthly. I had 2 episodes, one that lasted 6 months and another one that lasted 8 months after, actually that's the second, those 8 months, I think it was like 8 months that I didn't get a vaginal infection was after the exosomes. If you have not checked out my exosomes playlist, go and check that out. Because it will tell you my whole experience with exosomes and, how that went. But I did notice for several months after I did not get a vaginal infection. And then after a while, I guess when they weren't effective anymore in my body, that's when I started getting infections again. And then of course there was a period for 6 months, a few years before that. I don't remember why. I don't know if it was because I was on IVIG. I can't remember why. But I did go about 6 months without any infections, and then got one of the worst BV infections that I had ever had, because my symptoms are never very intense. They're always very light. I don't notice an odor. I don't notice a bunch of discharge. I don't notice all these crazy things. And then I just go to the doctors, they do a swab, and they're just like, okay, you have this, take this medication. So this has been several years at this point, probably the full 5 or 6 years. And it was a monthly thing, going to the doctors. Sometimes it was a yeast infection. I think I did go through a period where it was yeast infections, but then it just became BV, and it was BV every single month, typically after my period. I would get my period, BV after. I would get clindamycin, the cream that you put up there, and then it's like 7 days of clindamycin, and then you're good to go. I never really got a yeast infection from that, but I mean, I did here and there, and you treat the yeast infection with yeast cream or with diflucan, whatever. But the primary issue was BV. Again, I had never had a history of BV before, even while I was sexually active. It was just, I didn't really know anything about it. Sometime around 2020 or 2021, I remember it was during the pandemic sometime, I decided to finally see a gynecologist. I think I had to go for my, whatever your wellness check where you get screened for, HPV and stuff like that. And I was like, I need to ask why this is happening. I mean, I always assumed it was just because of my pre-existing issues, all of my other health situations that I had going, weakened immune system, whatever. You just assume that's what it is. You never really, and doctors really never shed light on it. The urgent care doctor that I would go to all the time was very, very intelligent, and she never really had much else to say except, let's run a swab and then prescribing the clindamycin. So I decided to go to a regular gynecologist, and I talked to her about, I said, look, I've been getting these infections monthly for several years now. It's just, I don't know what to do. And basically the only advice that she could give me was to not have a lot of sugar. My diet is already very low in sugar. There are times when I kind of binge a little bit on sugar, or where I'll have an increased amount because I seem to be tolerating it more. But for the most part, my diet is already low in sugar. It's not anything that's, excessively high in sugar. Like, it's weird that she would tell me that. And I'm just like, but my diet is already like as low as I can possibly get it in sugar. But that is one thing that you will read online, is just to minimize your sugar intake, and, because that can lead to yeast infections or whatever. So that was, I think, 2020, 2021, and I was just like, whatever, I'll do whatever I can, and continued getting yeast infection, the BV, and I was like, well, what can I do? This is just going to be a part of my life. I would do the clindamycin cream I would do it for like 5 days. I wouldn't even do it for the full 7 days, because I would try to like save some because I knew I would get another infection the next month. By the way, my gray hairs are coming in nicely. So I moved out, and keep in mind, I'm not having sex this whole time. You know, it's been 6 years, moved out last fall, and obviously living on my own now, and decided, you know, it's time. And I got on a dating app, and I kind of went a little crazy. Now, you know, what I want to stress here is that I've been having the recurrent BV all this time. This wasn't something that just started, and I was still having it even before, you know, I hopped on the dating app and, you know, became sexually active again. I was still dealing with all these issues. You know, things seemed to be going well. I knew the consequences, because obviously when, like I said earlier, when you disturb the pH in that area, it's going to make you more susceptible to infections. So I knew more or less that I was going to end up with an infection at some point. And that was just, you know, the risk I was willing to take, because I was like, I can't live my life in a bubble because of this. So, I was actually okay the first couple times. And then, I think sometime around November, that's when, you know, I started getting the recurrent infections, and I did the clindamycin. I went to 3 urgent cares, during this time. You know, got prescribed clindamycin, did the clindamycin, seemed a little bit better, and then, you know, had sex, got the infection again. So I almost kind of like needed to come up with a strategy. I was like, okay, I'm going to do the clindamycin before, and then after a few days after, then I can have sex and I should be okay, because I just did the clindamycin. And it didn't work out that way. And eventually the clindamycin just stopped working completely. And I just started having discomfort, started having a lot of discharge, which was unusual. I was like, what is going on? And didn't matter what I did or what I put up there, it was not going to work. It was not working. And the discomfort started becoming 24/7. Now, it wasn't mind-numbing discomfort. It wasn't super painful. It wasn't, but it was just constant. I also noticed, it was really weird. I was very jittery, and I was very, I couldn't focus on anything. And I have a feeling that I have been having a lot of histamine issues. I've been having histamine issues for years at this point. And I have a feeling that this infection was causing some kind of a flare-up in my histamine issues, because that I've read that histamine can cause that. It can cause jitteriness. It can cause, you know, lack of focus. But it was really bizarre. Like, I just could not. I was obsessively on my phone, you know, trying to, you know, looking things up and whatever. So finally, I have been looking for an urgent care near me here in my area, because my regular urgent care doctor is now farther away. And I did go to one urgent care that's a little bit closer out here, but it was still, you know, a little bit of a distance. And again, they just ran the typical BV, you know, vaginitis panel, which tests for BV, yeast, gonorrhea, and chlamydia. It would just keep coming back negative. So, you know, I'm going on like a month here, and which is actually the timeline for this infection. A month is actually really, really good, because I have read some stories. I finally, you know, I had gone to 2 urgent cares. Actually, I had gone to 3 urgent cares, and then I found another one. I looked up, you know, urgent cares near me that had really, really good reviews. Found one that was relatively close. And again, like I said, this was about after a month of just dealing with this stuff. And I go in there and I tell, and one of the things that bothered me was that it was a bunch of PAs. If you guys know anything about me, I do not like dealing with PAs. I want to deal with a doctor because my health issues are really complex. And I go in there and it's a PA. And I tell her, look, this is what's going on. It's been a month straight. Nothing is stopping the symptoms. Nothing is stopping this issue. I need you to test me for everything under the sun, anything and everything that you can possibly think of. I told her the test that I already had. I said, anything, anything, anything. So she goes, okay. And you could tell that she was uncomfortable. It was a woman too. And she was uncomfortable because she was going to have to do the swab. And I was just like, just get in there and do whatever you need to do. So, she did the swab. They tested me. It looked like almost maybe 20 different, types of infections. And, we finally found what it was. And it was something called Ureaplasma Parvum. Actually, it was that one, Ureaplasma ureolyticum, and some BV as well. So I turned up positive for those three. The Ureaplasma Parvum was off the charts. I think it was like 300 billion. It was some ridiculous amount, and a high amount was like over 1 million, and this was like in the billions. It was a ridiculously high amount. And this is important because one doctor, they were going to prescribe me a short course of antibiotics, but I started researching it and I was like, this is going to require a long course of antibiotics, possibly dual antibiotic therapy. So I called my regular urgent care doctor that was farther away, and she goes, yeah, you just got this infection, that I had just gotten this. So basically somebody had just given it to me. So there's some debate, and I'm not going to go fully into the debate, but there's some debate about whether this is an STD or whether it's a commensal bacteria. The urgent care where I got diagnosed told me it was a commensal bacteria. The other doctor from my regular urgent care told me that I had just gotten this. Now, given my history with BV, of having BV for years and years and years, this bacteria is linked to recurrent BV. And the fact that I had a bacterial load that was so massive, and this is a slow-growing bacteria from what I was reading. So to have such a massive overgrowth, this has been happening for a long time. I don't buy the whole, I just got it from someone. It's possible I could have gotten it somewhere. But I do think that it was just a massive overgrowth that happened over the course of several years. Likely, from whenever I started getting BV to last year, fall of last year. So I obviously started going online, reading horror story after horror story about the treatment for this type of bacteria. It is a mycoplasma bacteria. Can't get into the whole specifics of it, but basically it is a bacteria that doesn't have a cell wall. They tend to be very resistant to most antibiotics. And this test that they ran at this clinic also showed what it was going to be possibly resistant to. And it was resistant to most everything, with the exception of fluoroquinolone antibiotics. Now, that's going to be a whole other video. If you want to know anything about fluoroquinolones, you can just Google it or type it into the search bar. They are a very, very dangerous class of antibiotics that can lead to serious long-term issues. I will probably have to talk about that as well in a separate video, my own experience with them, because I did end up having to take them. I ended up having to take over 2 weeks of antibiotics, 2 dual antibiotic therapy. And let me tell you, it was not great. And it's been just, I don't like to use the term traumatic loosely, but I was getting to the point where, I felt like my life was completely ruined. I would come back to my apartment, I would take the trash out, come back to my apartment crying. I just could not handle what was going on. It was a nightmare of all nightmares. And especially reading all of the horror stories online. Getting diagnosed within a month for this type of bacterial infection is not common. Most people go sometimes years without getting the right diagnosis and just having horrible pain and discomfort. And a lot of people, sometimes they get rid of it and then it comes back. Some people just can't get rid of it because it's resistant to every antibiotic out there. I just don't think there are many very good treatments for this. Now, I want to end the story on a happier note. you know, the recommendation that I saw online, I've been on Reddit a lot, and that's where I've gotten most of my information. The recommendation by the people on Reddit is to get tested 4 weeks or more after your last dose of antibiotic, because you can get false negative results sooner than that. I got tested at 2 weeks and I was negative, and then I got tested at 4 weeks and I was still negative. This does not mean that it can't come back, and I am terrified that it might come back, because that seems to be the issue with me. I'm just happy that that the tests were both negative. I will be seeing a gynecologist soon that is familiar with this. I did go to a regular gynecologist through my insurance who flat out told me, I don't know what this is. So you may not have much luck with just your regular gynecologist when it comes to this this thing. So, you know, that being said, you know, I have done those kind of like over-the-counter tests, the EV tests, to test my microbiome, because I do think that I'm going to have to rebuild it. I basically killed everything off. I'm still having discomfort. I should make this a 2-part video, to be honest, because there's so much that goes into this. But it has just been an absolute nightmare, and there's still a lot of work to do. And I will keep you guys posted, but I really wanted to make this video because if you have been suffering with recurrent BV over and over and over again, and you can't figure out what is like you don't know why you just keep getting it, this might be the other issue. You might have an underlying ureaplasma infection, and that makes you more vulnerable or more susceptible to getting recurrent BV. It's really crappy. It sucks a lot. Wish I would have caught it earlier, but you know, the doctors, it wasn't up to me. It was up to the doctors. So yeah, I just hope that this helps somebody, because I wish I would have stumbled upon a video about this. I'm pretty sure there are videos on ureaplasma on here. But that was my personal experience. I may do a part 2 of this video just to let you guys know what happens after my appointment with the doctor, and just all the other lingering symptoms that I've been having. And I will probably also do another video. I did 10 days of doxycycline and 5 days of ciprofloxacin, which is a fluoroquinolone antibiotic. That was my treatment for this infection. And so I may do also another video on the Cipro issues. So thank you so much for joining me, and I will see you guys in the next one. Take care.